You know what's interesting? We spend our entire lives trying to get rid of fear. We pop pills for anxiety, we scroll through inspirational quotes about courage, we admire people who claim they're fearless. But here's what nobody tells you. A world without fear wouldn't be paradise, it would be a psychological nightmare. And the science behind why we need fear is way more fascinating than you'd think. Let's start with something most people don't realize. Fear isn't a bug in your psychological system. It's the main feature. Your brain literally can't function properly without it. There's this rare condition called Urbach-Wiethe disease that destroys the amygdala, the part of your brain that processes fear. Researchers studied a woman known as SM who had this condition. She couldn't feel fear at all. Sounds amazing, right? Except she kept walking into life-threatening situations. She'd approach poisonous snakes. She'd walk through dangerous neighborhoods at night. She couldn't recognize threats even when they were staring her right in the face. A study published in Current Biology found that without fear, she had no concept of personal space when it came to threats. She'd stand nose to nose with strangers in ways that made them deeply uncomfortable because her brain simply couldn't process danger signals. Fear is your brain's prediction system. It's running thousands of calculations every second, scanning your environment for anything that might hurt you. That uncomfortable feeling you get walking down a dark street? That's not paranoia. That's millions of years of evolution keeping you alive. Your ancestors who didn't have that feeling? They didn't become your ancestors. They became something else's dinner. Neuroscientists have found that fear activates the brain's threat detection network in about 200 milliseconds, faster than conscious thought. You feel afraid before you even know why you're afraid. And that split second has saved countless lives throughout human history. But here's where it gets really interesting. Fear doesn't just keep you physically safe, it's the foundation of your entire moral compass. Think about it. Why don't you steal from your neighbor? Sure, you might say it's because you're a good person, but dig deeper. There's fear underneath that. Fear of getting caught, fear of punishment, fear of shame, fear of losing your reputation. Remove fear entirely, and you remove the psychological brake system that keeps society from descending into chaos. A research paper in the journal Emotion examined psychopaths who show reduced fear responses and found they're significantly more likely to engage in antisocial behavior. Not because they're evil by nature, but because they lack the fear-based inhibitions that stop most people from crossing certain lines. Let's talk about what happens to decision-making without fear. You know that voice in your head that says, maybe don't do that? That's fear talking. It's not always right, but it's usually worth listening to. People with damage to their amygdala show something called acquired sociopathy. They can understand rules intellectually, but they can't feel the emotional weight of consequences. They make terrible financial decisions, terrible relationship decisions, terrible life decisions. Because fear is what makes consequences feel real. A study in the Journal of Neuroscience found that patients with amygdala damage showed no physiological response to financial losses. They'd gamble away money without the gut-level discomfort that normally stops people from making stupid bets. Here's something that'll mess with your head. Without fear, you couldn't learn. Not really. Think about how a child learns not to touch a hot stove. They touch it once, it hurts, fear gets encoded into that memory, and they never do it again. That's called fear conditioning, and it's one of the most fundamental learning mechanisms in your brain. Remove fear, and you remove the ability to learn from negative experiences. Researchers have found that people with diminished fear responses have to be taught the same lessons over and over because the emotional weight that normally cements learning into memory just isn't there. Your brain uses fear as a highlighter. It marks certain experiences as really important, don't forget this, and that marking is what separates wisdom from just accumulating random information. And relationships? Forget about them in a fearless world. You might think fear has no place in love, but you'd be wrong. The fear of losing someone is what makes you value them. The fear of hurting someone you care about is what makes you consider their feelings. The fear of being abandoned is what drives attachment. Remove fear from relationships, and you remove investment. You remove care. You remove the emotional stakes that make connections meaningful. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and expanded over decades of research, shows that fear of separation is literally the mechanism that bonds children to caregivers. Adults who report no fear of relationship loss often show patterns of avoidant attachment, where they keep people at arm's length, never fully investing because they don't feel the emotional pull that fear creates. Now, let's get into the really dark stuff. Fear is what makes you human in ways you probably haven't considered. Existential fear, the fear of death, the fear of meaninglessness, that's not just anxiety to be medicated away. That's the engine that drives human achievement. The philosopher Ernest Becker wrote an entire book called The Denial of Death, arguing that nearly everything humans create, art, culture, religion, legacy, stems from our terror of mortality. We build things that outlast us because we fear being forgotten. We create meaning because we fear a meaningless existence. Remove that fear and you don't get enlightenment, you get apathy. Terror management theory, one of the most well-researched frameworks in social psychology, demonstrates that reminders of death make people more creative, more generous, more driven to contribute to something larger than themselves. The fear isn't the problem, it's the catalyst. But here's the paradox that really gets interesting. The same fear that protects you can also destroy you. It's all about calibration. Healthy fear keeps you from stepping off a cliff. Unhealthy fear keeps you from leaving your house. The brain doesn't always distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. That's why you can feel the same physiological terror from a horror movie that you'd feel from an actual threat. Your amygdala is screaming danger, even though your prefrontal cortex knows you're safe on your couch. Research in the journal Nature Neuroscience shows that the fear circuit activates identically for real and perceived threats. Your body can't tell the difference, which means fear can get hijacked. It can attach itself to things that aren't actually dangerous, and suddenly you're afraid of elevators, or social situations, or making phone calls. And that's where it gets complicated. Because in the modern world, most of the things we fear aren't saber-toothed tigers. They're abstractions. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. These fears can be paralyzing because there's no immediate action to take. You can't run from the fear of not living up to your potential. You can't fight the fear of wasting your life. So the fear just sits there, churning in your gut, activating the same stress systems that were designed for short-term survival threats. Chronic fear floods your body with cortisol, suppresses your immune system, damages your cardiovascular health. The National Institute of Mental Health reports that anxiety disorders, essentially fear that's misfiring, affect nearly 20% of American adults. Fear saves lives, but misplaced fear ruins them. So what's the answer? It's not getting rid of fear, it's understanding it. Recognizing when fear is serving you and when it's sabotaging you. That uncomfortable feeling before a difficult conversation, that's healthy fear. It means this matters to you. That voice telling you you're not qualified for the job you want, that might be fear protecting you from embarrassment, or it might be fear holding you hostage. The skill isn't eliminating fear. It's learning to sit with it, to examine it, to decide whether it's giving you useful information or just screaming nonsense. The people who seem fearless aren't actually without fear. Research on extreme athletes and high-risk professionals shows they feel fear just as intensely as anyone else. They've just learned to reframe it. They recognize the physical sensations, the racing heart, the sweaty palms, and instead of interpreting them as stop signs, they interpret them as readiness signals. Their brains are saying, "This is important, pay attention," rather than, "This is dangerous, run away." It's the same neurological response, different interpretation. Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Fear is part of the deal. It's the price of consciousness, of caring, of being alive enough to have something to lose. A world without fear would be a world without love, because you can't care deeply about something without fearing its loss. It would be a world without achievement, because there'd be no challenge that felt meaningful enough to overcome. It would be a world without growth, because fear is what pushes you beyond your comfort zone. The goal isn't fearlessness. The goal is courage, which is fear plus action anyway. Fear is your brain's way of saying, this matters. And in a world that increasingly feels numb, maybe we need that reminder more than ever. If this perspective shifted something for you, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the psychology that actually explains how we work. And next time, we're exploring something even more fascinating, the psychology of people who don't get jealous in relationships. Because while fear might be universal, jealousy definitely isn't. And the people who don't experience it have some surprising things to teach us about attachment, security, and what it really means to love someone. See you then.